So we are going to talk about hypothesis testing. So this is theme 5 in the Disciplined Entrepreneurship book. I find that when I do new venture creation, it happens on day -1. I'm always checking hypotheses because especially when you're kind of inventing a new product category, a lot of times that you just don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of unknown unknowns. So the important thing is you write down your hypothesis. A good hypothesis needs to be written down. And this is a guy who wrote a book called Lean Analytics, Ben Yoskovich. I love that quote. And why do you want to write it down? Because it forces you to be honest with yourself. You cannot say, well, here's how the world works, and you have no data to prove it. That would be a belief. That would be a hypothesis. Anything you believe is true, but you don't know for sure is true, that's a hypothesis. And it really is worth writing down, because then it just really helps you organize your activities to answer the question of, is this a hypothesis that's going to be validated by real data or not? Okay, so the basic structure, according to Ben, is this, and there are many different formats for everything. There's a million ways to do everything. This is the one I like. I like the structure. I believe the target market will do this because of that. And why do I like that? Generally, anything that starts with I believe the target market is a good thing because it forces you to be really, really focused. You know, I believe small businesses such as plumbers and electricians will kind of do something to increase leads, because they are losing money because they don't have enough you would be able to kind of like write something in that format and then see whether or not you can find some of your target market and get them to do the thing. Does that make sense so far? So this is a hypothesis phrased in the way where you're saying, I think I can get that potential customer to do this action because this is the problem that they need to solve. This is what they're thinking about in their head, right? And then if you phrase it in that way, then you can design some kind of experiment to see if you can get them to do the thing. And what is this action? It generally does not have to be, I believe, a factory will buy a $32,000 robot because they have trouble hiring people on the line and are losing money. That's the wrong way to write a hypothesis. You want to write a hypothesis so that it's very, very granular and testable. So let's say, I'm trying to sell robots into a factory. And I have a hypothesis that they have a business problem. They can't hire people, they're turning away work, and there's all kinds of money left on the table because they cannot service the contracts that come to them, right? So if I have that belief, then someone in the factory would be talking to me if I go and ask them for a meeting about, do you have this problem and do you want to talk about some solutions? So in my case, I would say, I believe small job shops doing about $50 million a year who are, who have trouble hiring people will take a 15-minute phone call with me about, hiring issues and not being able to fulfill contracts because they are really suffering, the business is not growing, etc. Right? So that would be how I would phrase that particular. So there are some basic ideas about what makes a good hypothesis. So first of all, when you write hypotheses, you're going to be very tempted to say, I believe my solution is worthwhile and people will buy it because I think that this is true. And then the only way you would test that is you spend 6 or 9 months building out the whole thing and then people come or not, right? That means that you're bundling a lot of things. You want to take your hypotheses and break it down into components and figure out how to unbundle it. Like, for example, so take EPOP for an example, because you guys gave me a lot of material to work with, right? There's 2 potential benefits, right? There's the environmental justice piece, and then there's the data piece, right? So if you're trying to test the environmental piece, then you could maybe phrase the hypothesis in terms of asking for a meeting to talk about their environmental aspirations and values, as opposed to, asking them for a meeting about how they do the data and then seeing whether or not someone takes your meeting. So when you do B2B, if people take a meeting with you, that means a lot, right? Nobody wants to waste time on solicitations, right? So if they return your email, that's an indication of interest. If they take a meeting, that's an indication of interest. So you can phrase that hypothesis in terms of like getting someone to meet with you. And you want to make sure you don't bundle several things into the same hypothesis, because then that's unscientific, right? It's just like doing chemistry. If you change 4 things and then you do an experiment and you get some outcome, you don't know which one of the 4 things actually caused the outcome. You want to make sure they're unbundled. You want it to be observable. So you can't really write a hypothesis about what you think someone thinks, because, well, if they're thinking thoughts, they're not doing anything. You cannot observe it. And, you ask them to tell you what they think. Sometimes they can lie to you. They oftentimes will present to you the picture they want you to see of them, right? So you want to have the hypothesis have an observable component so that you can see if they are doing the thing that you want them to do. It needs to be testable. So you need to be able to write it in such a way that you can then set up a scenario where you try to get the person to do the observable thing. For example, if you do a landing page, right? So let's say I'm trying to do a pre-college program for entrepreneurship education for high schoolers who's checking out whether or not they want to come to Tufts University. This is actually a real thing I'm working on, right? So I'm working on a pre-college summer camp for high schoolers. How do I know if there's actually going to be any purchase interest? I can make a landing page. I will describe, what it is. It's going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be taught by faculty. It's going to cost this much. They're going to be living in the dorms as though they are Tufts students. You're going to have the full contrast Tufts experience, and you're going to learn all this stuff and meet local entrepreneurs, right? And then I can put a little call to action in there to say, sign up to learn more, or sign up for a webinar, or something like that. So if I kind of back up on the hypothesis would be, high schoolers considering, going to a particular university would kind of sign up for a webinar about a summer camp that gives them this kind of experience, right? So that would be how I would have written that hypothesis, and I would test it by sending this landing page around to high school students to see if anybody signs up for my webinar. And then that comes back to the cheap and fast to test. What can I test today? What can I test in the next hour? And I think that, the next hour is a really good frame, because everybody thinks I need 3 months, 4 months. That's too long. You need to kind of think about what can you test in the next hour that will give you some data that changes what you're going to do 2 hours from the next hour. Okay. All right. So one more concept. If you Google RAT, or riskiest assumption test, you're going to find quite a bit of material. So what it really is, well, hypotheses. If you sit down and give yourself some space, some quiet, and you think about all the things you think are true, but you don't know for sure, you're going to come up with 50, 60 hypotheses. If you really, really go and kind of put in the discipline of making it unbundled. Well, which one do you test first, right? And that's kind of the riskiest assumption test. That's the hypothesis, which, if you don't pass even this one sniff test, everything else doesn't even matter, right? So if you can't get past that, that would be the riskiest assumption test. And I like to kind of think about prioritizing what to test by thinking about what is important, what is unimportant, what is known, what is unknown. And you want to kind of like really optimize for the unknown and important things, because if it's in the lower left quadrant, it's unimportant and it's known, you don't need to test it, right? If it's important and it's known, it's factually true, you don't need to test it. So that gives you some kind of framework to kind of think about what is the first thing that we want to test. And we also have that template. And this is what I typically do for myself, right? When I'm trying to test a new product, new solution, new anything. I write the hypothesis in a way that I can test it. The minimum viable product for the purposes of the test is the smallest thing you can make. So in lots of cases, it's a landing page, and in lots of cases, it's just one page. It does not need to be pretty. It needs to be functional and communicates the correct stuff. And then I like to define the experiment. What is this interaction that I'm staging? Like, let's say I'm trying to test the landing page example with the high schoolers. I would find, someone in high school and ask them to circulate it amongst their friends to see if I can get any clicks. Duration, very important. I would say I'm going to wait 4 days for people to respond to this landing page email that, or, we're going to put this landing page call out on Instagram, wherever the kids are, right? So I'm going to run it for 4 days, and I'm going to count clicks to sign up to my Eventbrite. The currency, so in that particular case, the currency is a sign up, and that's an email. Now, email is like money, right? So again, when people don't know you and they are willing to give you their email, they've paid you with the email, because nobody wants junk mail. So in that particular case, again, it's the email, and the threshold is, can I get anyone to sign up? So I can say, I'm going to spam it on these networks. I'm going to wait 4 days, and I need at least 10 signups, because I predict so many people will see this call to action. Or I could say, I need at least 1 sign up, because if I can get nobody to sign up, then I have messaged it completely wrong. Right. So this is the discipline. You write down the experiment, and then you go and do the experiment. And then you can take the same discipline and do it over and over again. And now it should be really clear why we suggest that you write the hypotheses in the smallest granular way, and then also be able to test it very quickly and cheaply, right? Because you want to be able to run as many experiments as possible in unit time, so that you learn the most, and each learning is going to shape what you're going to do, and you can persevere or pivot based on each outcome of an experiment. So the shorter the experiment, the faster it turns around, the more you learn, and the faster you're going to get to an optimal outcome. When people think about payment, trying to validate whether or not your customer has willingness to pay, how much will they pay, you often think about, well, I have to get paid. That's really the ultimate test, is you have to get paid. So you have to offer to sell something, and they would give you their credit card, or they would actually take money from them. So that's the last step. There's many different steps you can have to have, some intermediate level of validation of purchase intent, starting with scheduling a meeting to discuss. And if you're really doing B2B, let's say you're doing business with the APC software division of Schneider Electric, right? So that's kind of a big division in a big business unit in a big company, not known for moving fast. Your first step could be getting the email of the administrative assistant of the person you need to reach, right? And then getting that person to agree to schedule you a meeting could be the first step of currency, because again, nobody wants to waste time on stuff that's not relevant to them. So when you think about currency, just really look at the lowest bar, like what is the least amount you can extract from your customer that indicates they have some interest, that cost them something to give you. And any email, any personal information, any time they give you, those are all really good indications of interest.